Consequences of Trump's foreign policy, Iran, Ukraine, NATO, and the post-war order. And we're very fortunate to have Dr. Tom Preston with us. He is the the C.O. Johnson Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Washington State University. He's published widely. The main areas where he focuses on is security policy, foreign affairs, and political psychology, which it looks like we'll see the use of how all those fit together in his talk tonight. I should also mention that this talk is in part funded by a grant from Tacoma Creates, and so we would like to thank them for funding this. And also, before I turn this over to Dr. Preston, I would also like to note that we have another talk coming up on May 27th at Bellarmine University, and that's Professor Patrick O'Neill from University of Puget Sound. He's a specialist on, among other things, Iran, and he's going to be talking about the politics of Iran as it relates to the current war. And also, before I turn it over to Dr. Preston, after his talk, he will be taking questions. And so if you have questions, submit them to the chat, and I will then be selecting those, and maybe if there's some on the same topic, might putting them together, and then we'll ask Dr. Preston to respond to those at the end of his talk. This is our fourth talk that he has given for us at the World Affairs Council, and they've all been great. He has mentioned that it all tends to be on periods of time when there's sort of bad news. So we're hoping this will be the turning point, and the next four he gives for us will be about how great things are going in the world. But until then, let me turn it over to Dr. Preston to give his talk tonight on the consequences of Trump's foreign policy.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to be here for the World Affairs Council, and I always enjoy having a conversation with your audience. Let me share my screen, okay, and hopefully, can everybody see that? Okay. All right. The topic tonight, I'm talking about the consequences for American foreign policy and really our global leadership of the Trump presidency, because there are a lot of serious implications sort of across the board. I know that President Trump wants to be considered a consequential president, and I think he is, but just not in a good way. So you can be consequential, but not in the positive way. And I think unfortunately that's kind of where we're at. Now, when I talk about sort of the post-World War II world order, what do I mean by that? And why is the Trump presidency such a departure from that? And really, when you look back at American foreign policy from 1945 to the present, really, aside from the Trump presidencies, I think you have generally a consistent pattern where we have created on a security level, on an economic level, we've been able to write the rules of the game for the trade regimes, all of this, because it benefited us. It was to our advantage to have the rules set up the way they were. And over the past 80 years, we've had just basically this pattern of kind of, if you ask what does American leadership in the post-World War II era look like, Well, we promoted free trade. I mean, we worked on lowering global trade barriers, the exact opposite of all the trade wars and tariffs. That was the sort of stuff we did in the 1920s and 30s that ended up helping to bring about the Great Depression. Uh, but in the post-World War II, we were promoting free trade because it helped our economy. We supported, generally speaking, democracies over authoritarian regimes. We developed and supported sort of military and economic alliances with allies. I mean, we magnified our own power through the use of alliances. We worked with the international community, with the United Nations. We were generally trying to support international law. We had all sorts of programs like USAID and things where we were, bringing vaccines to the world and all sorts of things like that. Um, and we also did things to magnify our power base. We invested in U.S. education and in basic scientific research, R&D. I mean, that's why we had military superiority. That's why we had economic dominance because of the investment, hundreds of billions of dollars a year in scientific research and R&D. Um, and we leveraged this economic power to advance our strategic interests, whether it be during the Cold War, rebuilding Europe with the Marshall Plan, or using U.S. economic aid to influence countries around the world, et cetera. And we spent a lot on defense. No surprise there. But we ended up creating the dominant military capacity in the world. So that's been our pattern in the post World War II era. Now, that's how it was. Here's how it is now. And really, I think it's fair to say that Trump has very much turned the post World War II world order completely upside down. Uh, and unlike the original sort of America First isolationists of the 1920s and 30s, because that's where the MAGA origins come from, it's from that earlier movement. Um, that America First was more isolationist. And I don't think you can really argue, certainly given what we're seeing in the world right now, that our MAGA here in the 2000s is not really isolationist, and certainly not in the way that Trump applies it. Instead, I think it's easier to see the MAGA sort of foreign policy as a hyper aggressive, sort of amoral power politics style foreign policy doctrine, kind of a might makes right sort of doctrine that's uniquely transactional in nature. Uh, and really, what you see across the board, all alliances, all of our economic policies, or any of our engagement seems to now be viewed solely through Trump's own very transactional lens. There's a calculation. How does this expand the U.S. or more often Trump's own personal power or wealth? So it is, and Trump has always been incredibly transactional, and it's becoming even more so now. So domestically, when we kind of think about how has Trump's presidency kind of changed sort of the rules or the game that's played, really domestically, Trump's policies have been really more resembled sort of the authoritarian populism of Putin in Russia or Erdogan in Turkey or Orban in Hungary, although Orban just lost his election. And the pattern that you just sort of domestic politics wise is, like in all of those countries, an attempt to get complete control for the executive branch, to emphasize voter suppression tactics, to subjugate the free press and the courts and universities, put pressure on them not to step out of line, solidify control over government. And you see a lot of that certainly with the gerrymandering stuff that we're seeing, a lot of that happening, a lot of the pressure on the media to not, put programs on that the president doesn't like, et cetera. So you see that dynamic happening domestically, and a certain, overseas. Well, among the things, we've and you can see how this is like the opposite of what I was describing in the post World War II order. Now we have the imposition of massive protectionist tariffs against all of our main trading partners, and trade wars being started. Trump kind of using tariffs as a way to strong arm other countries. It's just his main tool of foreign policy is tariffs. Um, Territorial expansion aspirations, even if they haven't come to fruit yet completely, but repeatedly demanding Greenland. We'll talk about this later. Making Canada the 51st state, re-annexing the Panama Canal, taking control of Gaza. There were even proposals to share tolls with Iran on the Strait of Hormuz until somebody clearly told him that's a bad idea. Demanding half of Ukraine's mineral wealth just to get some aid from the U.S. Without even security guarantees. The move towards Cuba, controlling Venezuela as well. I mean, these are all. That's a huge package right there. And certainly not building alliances. We've done nothing but undercut alliances. Trump tends to view the European Union as an adversary. He doesn't value NATO. He continually makes threats to withdraw from NATO, questioning the Article 5 mutual security relationship we have, abandoning various commitments to allies, whether it be Ukraine, whether it be Japan and South Korea, the Kurds, Europe just generally. And I think the thing that is most shocking, and I talked about that, I've given a few talks for the World Affairs Council on Ukraine and the Russian invasion and all of that. I think the thing that's the most shocking is just the support that the president has provided for Putin and for Russia, and basically siding with Russia and Putin against Ukraine and the EU. Abandoning aid to Ukraine, cutting off military aid, lifting Russia sanctions. Just absolutely shocking. And I think it's fair to say it is hard to imagine a foreign policy more different from those carried out by all of our post-World War II presidents, some of whom are on the slide right there. I think it's no longer sufficient to talk about a small change in U.S. foreign policy. This is not a small change in U.S. foreign policy that we are seeing. It is a seismic shift that changes everything about how basically much more of an imperial America relates to the world. You start seeing commentary if you read foreign press where we're referred to now as a rogue superpower, not the leader of the free world anymore. We've kind of abdicated that role. Certainly the president has, and just kind of this going around just throwing weight, demanding Greenland, all these things like that. That is not the pattern that we have had in the past. Hard to imagine these other presidents kind of pursuing that kind of a path. So I think a lot of times when we start talking about these things, everybody goes, "Well, how in the world did we get here? What is driving Trump to behave in some of these ways?" And so I'll put on my political psychologist's hat here. I do psychological profiles, and I'm a profiler, and we do assessments. So colleagues of mine and I, we profile foreign leaders at a distance, and a lot of my work on U.S. presidents is I've applied these models to profile American presidents. So what I'm going to talk about here now is sort of Trump's personality and what are some of the drivers of it, and what we might expect given those to see out of the president over the next 3 years. And if you're curious, this is the profile technique that we use. It's called LTA, and it is an analysis of their language and how they speak. And we've been using this technique for more than 25 years. We use it in government as well as in academia. We have a world leader set of over 1,000 world leaders at this point. So when I say something about Trump is high or low in something here momentarily, it is relative to that large world leader data set. So it's not just some random opinion about where his score is at. So what are we looking at with Donald Trump? Firstly, he's a leader that has low prior policy experience. I mean, basically non-existent. All of his background was in business. He had no governmental experience, and he never is hands-on enough to actually learn expertise on the job, even though he was president before. And I've had conversations with many of his cabinet people. He didn't develop expertise out of that. So he doesn't have experience or expertise in either foreign or domestic policy. So doesn't have that background. He has a high need for control. And you couple that need for power, that need for control, with a real high belief in his own ability to control events. He believes that he can control events rather than the events control him. Okay. He has very low conceptual complexity, and I'll talk about all these here in a second. Complexity is just, do you see shades of gray, or do you see the world in very absolute black and white terms? It's a spectrum. He has an extremely high distrust of others. I mean, it's so high, it is 3 standard deviations higher than the average score for all of those world leaders. Let's talk about 3 full standard deviations. So a real characteristic of Trump is this immense distrust. And with that high self-confidence, he also is not interested in task accomplishment. He's interested in relationship. He's interested in personal relationships over accomplishing tasks. In other words, he wants to be loved. He wants adulation. He wants all of those things. He cares less about actually accomplishing a given task as long as he gets the adoration. So what does that mean when we start breaking it down? Okay, if you have a leader like Trump, who has this high internal locus of control, that he really does believe he can personally control events and outcomes in the external environment. Now, a consequence is that leaders like that tend to take more risks, because they think they can control it, and they can often get themselves into very difficult policy situations just because they have this confidence that they can control stuff, when in reality might be very different, right? And they can't control it. And this Trump will generally directly challenge constraints in the environment because he thinks he can control his own destiny, and he doesn't have enough policy knowledge to really judge whether he should be challenging that environmental constraint or not. And he has a very insular advisory system. It isn't one that the antennae are not up. They're not gathering information from the environment. It's a very, very small inner circle, and that does not value expertise at all. So, it's much more ideological than it is. It's not based upon expertise. So when you have an advisory system like this, and we profiled Trump in 2016 and basically predicted how he was going to set up his advisory things, and it just fit exactly what his profile would suggest. And when you have that sort of advisory system, it can lead oftentimes to serious political miscalculations and policy fiascos just because of the way that you're making these decisions. Leaders like this tend to micromanage on select issues that they have idiosyncratic views about. They get frustrated and pushy very quickly if they feel like they're losing control. They frequently lash out at opponents. Does this sound familiar to anybody? And certainly it's a very much an ends justifies the means sort of Machiavellian kind of leadership style. In terms of complexity, low complexity, complexity again is it's not IQ. Complexity is, everybody varies on this. It's a spectrum. On the way, probably all know people who see the world as black and white. It's right or wrong, true or false. You're with us or against us, all of that. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you have people that see the shades of gray. Could say, well, it could be this, it could be that. There's many possibilities. People vary on this. Trump is extremely low complexity. That leads to very rigid belief systems. He ends up having a very closed advisory system because leaders like this don't value information. They don't value diverse opinions. They want all their advisors to basically agree with them. They want They want information that backs up what they already believe. If you're one of these people that believes it's right or wrong, true or false, whatever, well, you don't need me bringing in extra information. You already know it's right or wrong, right? That's Trump. And so he's largely insensitive a lot of times to the external environment. Like the antennae are not up, the antennae are down. They're not monitoring the environment. So it is a way that you can get yourself into even more trouble, when you're making decisions. And advisors around presidents like this that have low complexity, well, they tend to be picked based on loyalty and ideological fit rather than picked because of their competence or their expertise. For presidents like Trump, dissent is seen as disloyalty. And you see this very clearly in the dynamics in Trump's inner circle. um, and leaders like this also often make rapid, impulsive decisions based on little information search. They shoot from the hip because they just, it's all black and white to them. They don't need the extra information. Whereas, somebody that's high complexity like an Obama or somebody like that, they're always wanting more information. They're always wanting to talk. They don't make quick decisions. Low complexity leaders do. Um, and they do not learn very quickly. They don't adapt well to a changing environment. Um, and it makes sense if you think about it, because if you're not gathering information, you're not really getting diverse opinions. Well, how are you going to adapt to the environment? You're not even going to necessarily notice the environment's changing until it blows up on you. And you see this. This is what happened for Johnson in Vietnam. It's what happened for Bush in Iraq. And I would argue that that's what you're seeing with Trump in Iran. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where people tend to overestimate their own expertise or competence sometimes because they lack the knowledge to know what they don't know. So they overinflate what their own views are. Uh, and Trump is very, very much sort of a walking, breathing example of Dunning-Kruger effect, because it's sort of what I describe as a pseudo expertise problem. I mean, Trump thinks he's an expert. He's always, I'm a genius, I'm smarter than anybody else, I know better than anybody else. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't know the information, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know, to kind of paraphrase Rumsfeld. So, you have that pattern with Trump, and when you bring in the lack of policy experience or expertise into this, um, and he doesn't have the background knowledge in given policy areas, but because all of his advisors are selected based on loyalty rather than expertise, his inner circle advisors are generally pseudo experts too. So as a result, you often will have poorly designed and implemented policies. You'll often have a tendency to be caught by surprise, by blowback, uh, the lack of awareness of what my military colleagues would call second and third order effects. You knock that first domino over, but nobody's predicting what the next two or three is going to be. Um, and I think you can see an illustration of this with Trump being kind of caught flat-footed with Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. Well, that anybody that knows that region would have said that's a danger, and Trump dismissed it totally, and then was surprised that Iran did that. Um, so, overall, when you think about that personality, it's kind of a dangerous combination of characteristics: a need for control, no expertise, and low complexity. When you couple it with a very dysfunctional advisory system like Trump has, basically filled with a whole bunch of inexperienced, you know, non-experts, sort of pseudo-expert advisors, um, that makes him different than previous presidents that have had those personal characteristics like Trump, but somebody like Truman or Reagan or LBJ or W. Bush, they all had experienced advisors. They didn't have just people with no expertise at all. This is kind of unique. And I think it's dangerous in that regard because there's no guardrails. There's no expertise to kind of help Trump interpret the world. And this is similar. I mean, I had a dinner with Jim Mattis, who'd been the defense secretary for Trump. And he was just basically reiterating all of the things I'm talking about, that is Trump's style. And the thing about this, as a personality researcher, I can say, look, the things about Trump that I'm describing are going to be exacerbated by the effects of age and health issues. So these dominant personality characteristics become more pronounced with aging, whether it be the narcissism, whether it be whatever. So if you think Trump has some of these characteristics, they're going to be worse 2 or 3 years from now. And this is a style that's ill-suited to crises, especially crises that are ambiguous or really complex, because they don't gather information. They don't know how to navigate it. So and during when a leader like this gets under a high stress, what we have found as profilers is that any of these personal characteristics of Trump get magnified under stress in the direction that they currently lay. So, for example, if Trump is distrustful or needs to control everything or is really low in complexity, he's going to be even more needing control, even more distrustful, even less complex if he's in a crisis where he starts getting more and more stressed. So these things can be exacerbated by crises as well. So that's something to bear in mind, because here you've got the main decision maker. Now, let me just kind of run through a number of the impacts in some areas of American foreign policy, and then I'll try to, give plenty of time for Q&A. And again, I'm willing to stay a little bit later to give everyone a chance to kind of ask some questions. But what have we seen so far in just a little over a year? Very much an aggressive America First foreign policy, but it's done a lot of damage to the post-World War II order. And I was talking to John before the session began. I've been consulting for the government for more than 30 years. And, I can honestly say that, already in just a year, a little over a year, there's been generational level damage done to the intelligence community, to the State Department. We're hemorrhaging all of the expertise. Everybody's being forced to quit or being driven out, and then they're firing all the new people that we're going to replace. So you're getting a lot of these agencies run by people who are not qualified to run them, and you're hemorrhaging all of the expertise. This is going to be something that's going to long outlive Trump. And here's a consequential aspect of his presidency. Trump could be gone tomorrow. Or 3 years from now, you're going to have that continuing damage to the intelligence community and the State Department, things like that, for decades to come. That's how bad it is. And it's not hyperbole to say this, because I've been back talking to my colleagues back in DC, and it is grim. But what of some of the things that we're doing? Well, certainly, as I mentioned, questioning the value of our alliances, whether it be NATO, whether it be the United Nations. Trump's talked about withdrawing from both, withdrawing from international agreements and organizations. So we're not really seen as trustworthy to even negotiate with at this point. Biden re-entered us into the Paris Climate Accord and into the World Health Organization, and then Trump pulled us right back out of these things when he came in. It was one of the reasons the Iranians didn't want to negotiate with Biden to try to bring back the nuclear deal, because the Iranians, correctly, I think, said, well, what's to stop if another president like Trump is coming in and tearing it up, even if we come to an agreement with you? Well, that's what would have happened had they even cut a deal with Biden. And we've been dismantling a lot of organizations and agencies that historically advanced American soft power. I mean, we get so hung up with our hard power, our military power, our economic. Well, yeah, but soft power is also important. Reputation is power. And we had organizations like USAID, incredibly influential, gave us a lot of influence in the world. The Voice of America, putting out. We don't even have the Voice of America beaming into Iran anymore, and yet here we are in a crisis with Iran. The World Health Organization, we're pulling out of that. even trying to undercut. I mean, they want to eliminate the Fulbright program and all of these things, making it driving away international students, the massive cuts to the State Department, and we're closing consulates all over Africa because I guess we don't need to worry about Africa. uh, Downplaying diplomacy. Um, and the thing is, we're increasing defense spending, but it's not being done in a coherent manner. If anything, a lot of these spending initiatives they're talking about doing are incredibly wasteful and pie in the sky sort of stuff. That's just a waste of money, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But what you're seeing very much so is politicization or politicizing the intelligence community, the military community. When you start having loyalty tests across government, when you're getting a job, you have to, kind of pledge loyalty to the administration. Where in the world did this come from? Um, it's very, very different. And you think about just some of those impacts, the protectionist trade policies. Well, the Supreme Court's kind of ruled that a lot of these national emergencies were kind of legally questionable for some of the tariffs. But again, these tariffs have been raised all over the place. We still have a lot of tariffs in place. Trade wars started with allies. Even putting tariffs on Canada because they ran a Reagan TV ad during the World Series. I mean, using tariffs on Brazil because they prosecuted their former president Bolsonaro, who tried to overthrow their government. And so Trump puts a tariff on them because they put Bolsonaro in prison. Things like that. I think the damage to Europe. I mean, I still cannot believe that Greenland crisis, where literally you had the Danes and other people putting troops in and putting explosives on some of the runways to blow them up in the full expectation that the US might invade Greenland, a NATO territory. What has happened? How have we gone so far away from creating NATO and it's a part it's our alliance of influence to the point where we are seen and you look at public opinion polling across Europe, we're seen as more of a threat than Russia is. That's embarrassing. Um, and then just we've seen a pattern, even though Trump kind of campaigned on not getting involved in forever war, not getting involved in future wars and all this, condemning everybody else for doing that. Well, we're at war with Iran. We've had blockades of Cuba. We've had blockades of Venezuela. We've seized Maduro out of Venezuela. We've done airstrikes in Nigeria. We've done airstrikes in Yemen. We bombed Iran last year in July. The drug boats being bombed, the rhetoric threatening to blow up people just generally. I mean, that's kind of the rhetoric that we're coming out with. Uh, and when you start just sort of randomly, you almost have it's almost like Tony Soprano running policy because we're going to shake down the Ukrainians. I talked about this in the last World Affairs Council meeting session where we were demanding half of Ukraine's mineral wealth in exchange for maybe giving them some further aid and to pay off what we had given them already freely under Biden. Oh, we're suddenly making you pay that back. But we're extorting them for half of their mineral wealth and not even giving them a security guarantee. Well, what sort of a shakedown is that? Or let's turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East, or uh, let's share tolls with Iran in the Gulf of, the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, we'll control Venezuela's oil. I mean, this is, and again, it's very much that transactional nature because Trump thinks in terms of transactions. So, and you can see it with all this, like part of his anger at NATO and the Europeans is, we've been providing your security. How dare you not give us Greenland when we ask for it? It's a quid pro quo. It's a transaction in Trump's mind. And certainly, I think from I've long talked about this, but I think it's shocking that Trump has abandoned support for Ukraine. We're providing no We're providing no military aid at all. And there's actually Mitch McConnell did an opinion piece today. It was in the Washington Post, uh, saying, "Hey, there's $300 million or $400 million that was given for Ukrainian security, and the Pentagon's refusing to send it along right now." Um, and and we've in the past cut off intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians. I mean, a lot of the gains the Russians made over the last year have been because we've been uh, strangling them on their military aid to Ukraine. A lot of those reverses wouldn't have happened had we not been playing games in Congress. They cut off military aid for 6 months when Biden was president, and then the Russian offensive was happening, and they started losing ground because they were running out of ammunition. Um, so, and Trump even blames Zelensky and Ukraine for starting the war, even though it's obvious to everybody that Russia invaded them. Um, the administration's demanded Kiev cede occupied territories to Russia for a peace treaty. Uh, has been attacking Zelensky, including that famous meeting in the that ambush in the White House. So you can see this picture on the slide. Um, when you think about the damage this imagery does, when we're talking about how do other allies anywhere in the world trust the U.S. to be an ally? I mean, the British official today, even though King Charles was uh, talking nicely today and trying to reiterate the special relationship with Britain and the importance of NATO, but yet people in Europe, officials, have talked about, well, we can't even necessarily really think of the U.S. as an ally at this point because the Europeans are in it on their own in Ukraine. I mean, I think you saw a bit of this developing with that Munich speech that Vice President Vance gave in February of last year. Um, because the EU had been trying to clamp down on some of the really far right fringe political parties in Europe. Well, they were attacked for doing that. Vance telling Kiev to surrender territories to Russia. Uh, and basically, we don't provide any support for the Europeans regarding they are buying weapons from us to give to the Ukrainians, but we're not providing any. But we started negotiating with the Russians about Ukraine's future, about the territories they surrender, not having a future in NATO, basically conceding to all of Putin's demands. It was a policy of appeasement. And, irony is never far away when we're talking about these policies. Vance is in Munich, of all places. When we start talking about giving away the territory of another country to an aggressor, uh, and just like happened at Munich with the Czechs, who were not invited to the Munich conference when we were granting Hitler his request for Sudetenland, the Ukrainians weren't invited to these meetings. Just absolute polar opposite of what the Biden policy had been for sure. But I have trouble imagining Ronald Reagan or any of the post-war presidents doing that. And again, this damage to our relationship with the Europeans and with NATO, it is generational damage. This isn't just going to go away when Trump leaves. And even if assuming the Republicans get swept out of power in 2028, that special relationship and trust is not going to come back quickly. That's going to take a long, long time to repair, if it can be repaired. And it's one of the biggest examples of self-harming oneself. It's hard to imagine a superpower doing more self-harm than us, scuttling NATO, alienating all of our allies, um, supporting autocrats, all of these things like that. You rupture trust, it is very hard to get it back. And yeah, I think if there's any positive of this, the Europeans are expanding their own defense capabilities. They are spending more on defense, which they needed to do. But on the negative side, we're losing the cooperation of that alliance. They're not, I mean, Trump shouldn't have been that shocked after he's been treating the Europeans the way he has the last year and the whole Greenland debacle and all of that, why they weren't necessarily falling over themselves to help us with Iran. Um, and you're seeing, some of the consequences is the Europeans are now not buying U.S. weaponry, not going to buy the F-35, don't want the U.S. necessarily controlling their ability to use their military. They're going to buy Swedish fighter aircraft. They're going to do other things. So that is going to have blowback on U.S. defense industry at a certain point. I think when you think about Europe, the winners Putin and China, and the losers the U.S. and Europe. As far as China goes, I think the policy really is making China great again, not making America great again, because Trump's policies vis-a-vis China are strengthening them and weakening us. And I think the biggest thing I would point to there is just the absolute gutting of U.S. spending on R&D and education in the U.S. I mean, they have cut hundreds of billions of dollars out of basic scientific research at the universities all across the country, shuttering scientific agencies. We just had the EPA losing their science. He fired the entire board, the National Science Board that runs the National Science Foundation yesterday. All of those are the things that gave us the technology and cyber advantages that have translated into military capabilities and economic abilities to compete with China. Well, now we're destroying, it's like we're cutting the roots of the tree. And it's not going to feed the bigger tree anymore. Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership in his first term. That was meant to balance China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was, getting a lot of resources out and magnifying their influence all through Asia. Well, we basically ceded the economic landscape to China back in Trump's first term. And now the defense spending, the Golden Dome and missile defense thing, which is all pie in the sky, technologies that don't exist. The Golden Fleet, Trump insisting on his Trump class battleships with technology that is only on the drawing board. There's nothing that is, it's all a hypothetical concept, and he was demanding it be built by 2030. It takes usually 10 years for the Pentagon to design a new weapons system. Okay, it's just totally unrealistic, but yet they're talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars or more on just those sort of things. To me, as a defense analyst, I would say that's a golden opportunity for China because they're focusing much more on power projection and real capabilities that would be valuable in the South China Sea or Taiwan, et cetera, whether it be aircraft carriers or whatever else. And again, that whole dynamic of what we're doing in Europe and not being a reliable ally, what does that say about our credibility in Asia? Everybody keeps saying, oh, we're going to pivot to Asia and we need to, have these resources to, well, how much trust should Taiwan have in us that we would come to their aid? How much trust should South Korea or Japan have, really, when you look at what we're doing other places? I think, if anything, that transactional policy, well, I would argue that we're weakening our deterrence of China with the sort of things we're doing. And we're kind of fortunate that China is sort of in a phase of doing purges of their own generals, because if there was ever a time that it would be smart for China to invade Taiwan, it's right now. And of course, all of the trade wars and the tariffs and stuff, we've abandoned all of green energy to China. Trump's, we're fossil fuel, and trying to stop all green energy, solar and wind power and all that here in the U.S. In China, it's contributing 40%, almost half of their entire GDP is coming from green energy. They're leading the world in the technology of electric vehicles and solar power and wind power. it is like the best way I can describe this is we're insisting on building horse-drawn carriages when China is now doing the combustion engine in Model Ts. That's the future of this economic competition. And again, not going to end up in a happy place for us. And China is adding, they're spending $600 billion on their education and basic science research when we're gutting ours. So you think there's a gap now with AI and some of these other things, you just wait. It's going to get a lot worse. And then finally, Iran, and then I'll kind of turn it over to conversations. What are some of the consequences of the Iran war? We're still in the process of finding out, but I think it's fair to say Iran is not Venezuela. And this was a fundamental mistake Trump made. And I encourage all of you, if you're curious about the decision making, to go into Iran, having the war with Iran. The New York Times had this account laid out all of the dynamics, how Netanyahu briefed Trump, how the intelligence community told Trump the Israeli assessments are wrong, that there was not going to be an overthrow of the Iranian government, the population was going to rise up, they might shut the Strait of Hormuz, and Trump ignored the intelligence community and just went along because, well, I got Maduro. It was successful in Venezuela, and I think he just thinks Iran was going to roll over. Now, very few people that know much about Iran would have predicted they would have just rolled over. And the military part's always the easy part. The military part was the easy part overthrowing Iraq. The military part was the easy part overthrowing the Taliban in Afghanistan. Clausewitz once said, everything is simple in war, but the simplest things are difficult. And that's the lesson Trump didn't learn. Winning the peace is the hard part always. And so what you've seen is, I think, Trump only knocking that first domino over and then being surprised by the second and third order effects that have happened afterwards and are continuing to happen right now. Not a whole lot of viable off ramps for the president with Iran policy right now. And I think what the Iran war is demonstrating is, okay, we're changing the post-World War II order. We're weakening ourselves on a whole bunch of different levels. But what we're also seeing is the reality of limitations to U.S. power. This competition between the U.S. and Iran is really boiling down to who can tolerate pain and costs longer. The Iranian economy or the global economic damage and the oil price inflation, gas prices in the U.S., how that's going to hit Trump politically. I mean, both sides are getting damaged. And the thing is, all of our Gulf allies, they're getting damaged too because their whole economies are getting hammered too. The European economy, there's countries in Asia, like the Philippines, that was down to 2 weeks of fuel. And now now we're blockading the blockade. So, if we're trying to reduce the price of oil, that probably doesn't help. But the whole point is a lot of this, there's not going to be Iranian regime change. Okay. There wasn't a regime change. And if anything, the extreme groups in Iran are even stronger now than they were before. Because the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they're stronger now than they were before. And they've always been the hardliners. There's no easy peace deal. I mean, Trump is very quick to tell everybody they don't have any cards. You'll remember him saying that to Zelensky. Well, he was saying the Iranians don't have any cards. They actually do. One of those cards is the Strait of Hormuz. Another card is their indifference to civilian suffering. They will tolerate all. They fought a war with Iraq and had 1 million casualties. The Iranians can suffer things out. Their ability, if we start bombing all of their power plants and water infrastructure and do those, well, essentially war crimes that Trump keeps threatening to do to Iran, the Iranians are well capable of blowing up the oil infrastructure and all of those things in the neighboring Arab states. Already, they're talking about it might take 10 years to restore the damage that's already been done. You magnify that with, if Trump does that to Iran and then they retaliate, that's going to be an unmitigated disaster. I mean, if you think the oil price is $110, $115 is bad, try $200 a barrel. That's not hyperbole that it could go that bad if you do something like that. So that's what I mean by there aren't a whole lot of good options here. The Iranian nuclear program was not eliminated. They have not lost the knowledge that they had acquired already. I mean, I work nuclear proliferation issues, and where the Iranians, we probably don't even know where all of the Iranian facilities are, and everybody keeps talking about the 960 pounds. Yeah, there's enough material potentially for 100 bombs. Show me the proof that the material hadn't been moved before we bombed Natanz. I mean, we keep assuming that stuff's buried. The Iranians knew we were going to attack. Is all of it buried? Or did they move some of it? How do you know? That's the maybe that's the intelligence analyst in me, but there's a whole lot of assumptions being made, and this wasn't the way to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program anyway. I mean, they had shipped out all their highly enriched stuff with the Iranian nuclear deal that Obama did. And the current war is a consequence of Trump coming in and just tearing up the agreement, which the Iranians were abiding by, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. So this is a consequence of Trump getting out of a deal that dealt with the main threat, which was the nuclear one. And now here we are. And now what is our goal? Is it to eliminate the nuclear program? Is it to do regime change? Is it to get the Strait reopened? Because it was open, but now it's closed. I mean, what are we trying to do? It's become just this amorphous policy because it was never clearly thought out, and certainly the political price Trump's paying, in the polling, is because they never prepared the ground. They never prepared or made the case to the American public as to why we need to do this. So I would argue that I think the Iranians have a stronger hand than does Trump. Because he's not willing to put massive amounts of troops on the ground. And I think that would be a disaster if they did. But that's out. The war is already like, what, 22% popularity in the US. So can you imagine if he put the 82nd Airborne on the ground in Iran? The huge costs of the war, they're talking about a $200 billion special request. We burned through $30 billion of weaponry in the first week. It's going to take years to replace the weaponry. We've probably used almost half of our Tomahawk inventory at this point. We've used at least a quarter or 30% of all of our interceptor inventories. It takes 36 months to produce one Tomahawk cruise missile, and usually we produce 76 in a year. Well, we shot that. We shot hundreds of them off. We did years worth of procurement in just a few weeks. Well, those have consequences. Gas prices going up, all of these things. I think that those political consequences are going to be more damaging to Trump and the Republicans than they're willing to pay. So I don't necessarily buy that the Iranians have no cards. Again, damage to the U.S. reputation in the Middle East. We're seen as basically any Israeli actions in Gaza or Lebanon, we're seen as totally linked by the Arab population in the Middle East. I think the Gulf states will blame us for not protecting them, even though they kind of encouraged us to deal with Iran, but they were wanting Iran dealt with. Where we're getting at with Trump now is, okay, now we've got an endless ceasefire, but are you talking about regime change or are you talking about something else? So Iran, all they have to do is outlast us to be kind of viewed as a winner. And again, the military capabilities that we've been have weakened because of the crisis, I think are going to be long lasting. It's going to impact our ability to, if we did need to respond to a crisis in Taiwan or something else, we're going to have a really rough time because we're depleting most of our standoff weapons. So, well, that's a lot. There's a lot of ground there, and I tried to kind of give you a taste of various angles, but I'm happy to explore any of these things in more depth or whatever questions you have. So, John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Um, yeah, so my first question was like, if you didn't need to hold back, what would be the bad news? But I guess we've covered that. So I will get to the other questions. I think our president Cindy has her hand up. So did you want to say something, Cindy?
I do not. I did
Oh,
not.
okay, I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
misreading the my Zoom interface here. Well, so I've got some. Let me read some questions from the audience. I actually do have some real questions, but let me get to
Okay.
some of the ones that people have submitted in the chat.
Okay.
And for the rest of you, if you have questions, submit those as well. But we start with one from John, and not this John, but a different John. How does Trump's lack of consistency tie into the evaluation of him that you have discussed? Thinking here especially of Iran and the question of unconditional surrender versus sharing tolls on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Well, I think what you see, I mean, on one level, he's consistent in that, once you kind of, he has a certain belief system. And so, and you can kind of predict that there's not going to be well thought out policy because he's not getting expert opinions. And even if he gets expert opinions, he doesn't listen to them usually. But I think what you're seeing with some of the movement from like, yeah, I think Trump just shoots from the hip a lot of times rhetorically,
Mhm.
and he'll just kind of throw out something like, because his brain works on transactions. That's Trump's MO. So, oh well, how can I get an advantage, or how can we make money off of the straight thing? Well, Iran's talking about charging a toll. Why can't we split that with them? And I'm sure that then somebody kind of said, no, ixnay on the tolte, let's not do that. That isn't a good idea. And then he backs off of it. But, he kind of, it's almost stream of thought because he's not, and I think the question is kind of getting at the idea that, American policy just fluctuates from one thing to another, just all over the place. Well, it's fluctuating, but it's just like whatever Trump saw on the TV. I mean, there's a long pattern where, he would react to something that was on Fox, or he would react to something that somebody said to him, and whoever talked to him last, and that would be where Trump was. So, I mean, it's consistent. He's getting information and maybe coming up with some ideas, but they're coming from all over the place. And the thing is, Trump never went through the process of developing a really well thought out strategy for Iran to begin with. And that's why you don't have one now, because there was never a total agreement on what are we trying to do. And Trump had just like the belief that everything was going to be easy. It's almost like when we went into Iraq, Rome said, oh, they'll greet us with candies and sweets in Baghdad. Well, no, they didn't. If you come in with these unrealistic expectations, and that's what Trump did. And so then he's running into the reality is hitting him, and then he's just kind of flailing around looking for some sort of response. But it's usually not one drawn from expertise or from, you know, he's it's just whatever, oh, regime change or missiles or nukes or the strait or, just a whole laundry list of things. Now, in fairness, all of those things are issues, but are all of those things equally addressable with just a military tool? Probably not. I mean, but at various points, there will be more of an emphasis upon one thing or another. And a lot of times, Rubio will try to lay out, here's what we're doing, and then Trump will contradict him like a few hours later. And then Rubio's, behind the elephant with the broom, kind of, okay, yeah, that's what we're doing. So, so I mean, there is a consistency there. It's just that he's consistently inconsistent is, I guess, one way to describe it.
Yep. So I'll get to the next question in just a minute, but like a lot of this, and I guess is why so much is political psychology, is that a lot of the normal constraints are gone for Trump, and so all of a sudden, like the peculiarities of his personality are sort of what is driving everything. Is there anything that might happen in the next 3 years that might cause some of the things that normally would discipline, sort of someone's view, sort of like either in terms of the inner policy people, Congress, the electorate, checks and balances, reality, are any of these things likely to force Trump to
Yeah,
maybe alter?
the thing that there were guardrails in his first term, and
Right.
he appointed some people, whether it be Kelly as his chief of staff, General Kelly, whether it be Jim Mattis as defense secretary, or there were these people with experience that pushed back. Trump didn't like that. And he fired a whole bunch of these people, whether it be Bolton, whether it be all these other people. This time around, you'll notice he didn't appoint people like that. There were none of these old experienced my generals sort of thing like he did in the first term. He just brought in everybody who was just a sycophant, whether it be Patel over at FBI, no qualifications for that job. Christy Nome over at Homeland, no qualifications for that job. Tulsi Gabbard, no qualification to be director of national intelligence other than just being a loyal soldier, right? So those guardrails are gone. And the Congress, the Republicans in Congress they've just abdicated their role. So they're not a check. And then you've had rulings giving Trump immunity, from the Supreme Court. There's a lot of guardrails that used to be there that aren't. I think, to your question, I think where there might be some guardrails come up is, I think the election and the midterms, I think it's pretty obvious the Republicans are going to get pasted. And now, will Trump try to interfere with that election or claim that there's voter scandals or other things like that, try to seize voting machines? Just because we think there'll be a blue wave doesn't mean we couldn't have Trump have a very defensive reaction to that. But assuming that comes through, and maybe the Democrats take the Senate and the House, well, then there would be a guardrail again to some degree. And I think public opinion turning on him to the extent that it has, I think that is putting pressure on there. But, the thing about this, John, is that presidents like this, and I've done a lot of work on Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam, and I've interviewed a lot of the people that worked with Johnson, McNamara, Bundy, all of those guys. And one of the things that happens with presidents like this is that they really have trouble once they get dug in on something, being able to pull back. And it takes them almost getting hit like Wile E. Coyote with the truck in the face. It's just that sort of pushback. It has to be so clear and just to overwhelm that, because Trump and a lot of times people like that will have their own reality bubble that they're inhabiting because they only get information that supports their beliefs. They only have people telling them what they want to hear, agreeing with them. Well, what breaks you out of that? Bang. And a lot of times it takes a lot of bangs to get people. It did for Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam. It took a number of those sort of things for W. Bush in Iraq. So, I would anticipate that would be the same with Trump, probably worse. It'll take even more just because, unlike those other presidents who actually had some experienced expert advisors around them to help interpret what was happening, Trump doesn't have that. So I think it's almost like he's trying to work through a minefield, but he's wearing a blindfold because he's hobbled his support system, the advisory system, the intelligence community, and things that would have provided some guidance. So, there are some guardrails coming, but I think Trump's gonna be Trump. And if you can keep him within a particular lane, maybe there'll be less damage done. But that is the pattern you see with not just U.S. presidents, but other world leaders that have the sort of profile Trump has that I talked about earlier. So.
Right. Well, excellent. So we had a lot of questions here to get through. So let me get next one from Sherry. How likely is it that Trump would withdraw the US from NATO? And if he did, what would be required for a future administration to rejoin the alliance? And what would the stakes of this be?
Well, I mean, there was a law passed by Congress that said that a president on their own authority can't withdraw us from NATO without a vote in Congress, a two-thirds vote. Now, that would have to go to the Supreme Court because Trump's already, well, that isn't valid. Just like, we talk about the War Powers Act that limits presidential use of force. We don't know that that's constitutional. It's never been taken to the Supreme Court. And most presidents will kind of give lip service to it. But I think no presidents have necessarily felt that it was constitutional, but they didn't want to push it to go to the Supreme Court. Well, I mean, Trump would probably want to litigate. I have the ability to do that. I think it'd be a disaster if we pulled out of NATO. Talk about the ultimate self-harming. And, I always find it, I think a lot of times Republicans keep pretending that they're being like literal, oh, this is what the founding fathers meant. Well, the founding fathers didn't want the president to be a king, right? That was the whole point of the revolution. And it's very obvious from, if you've ever read the Federalist Papers or any of these things like that, what did we do with, we broke up checks and balances. We didn't allow the president to have the power of the purse. Congress is supposed to be the one to declare war, right? To make a treaty, you have to have two-thirds vote in the Senate. A president just can't make a treaty like a king can. Well, if they didn't want a president to have king-like treaty powers, why should a president have the ability to pull you out of a treaty unilaterally if it takes two-thirds of the Senate to put you in it? There's some real problems there. It's never gone to the Supreme Court. Now, with this Supreme Court, who knows what they would come up with. But I think generally speaking, you would assume that no, you don't have that authority. But we've seen presidents pull us out of treaties unilaterally before. W. Bush pulled us out of the ABM treaty. Trump pulled us out of the INF treaty. There's a whole bunch of things. So I don't know where that would go. If we pulled out of NATO, like I said, I think it would be disaster. I mean, talk about ceding a lot of your influence to China and really destabilizing Europe. I don't see how we benefit from that. I remember when I had dinner with Jim Mattis, I was telling you about, and I asked him, I said, well, so, this was after the Ukraine invasion. I asked him, well, so, what do you think Trump would have done if he had been in presidents when Biden was, when Putin invaded Ukraine? And Mattis's response was, well, he'd probably send Putin a congratulations card. And I asked him, are you, there's scuttlebutt that he was really seriously talking about pulling out of NATO. And Mattis literally said, yes, I was fighting him on that the whole time I was there. And I threatened to quit a couple times. And he was certain that Trump was going to try to pull us out had he won re-election in 2020. So that's interesting just from Mattis's perspective. Several years back in chatting with him, he saw that as very much where Trump wanted to go. Now, maybe, Trump's got so many irons in the fire that maybe he's not focusing purely on NATO. I mean, Greenland, or now it's Iran, and then it was Cuba. Cuba's next, apparently, and all this. So maybe, maybe Trump's being a little ADHD and not being able to focus on just one thing. But it would be, I just think that talk about generational damage. I mean, well, if he pulls out of NATO, why not pull out of the UN? What would happen? Talk about an end to the post-World War II order. Two of the main organizations that were pillars of it.
Yeah. Well, so kind of along those lines, I guess, about the consequences, Dan had a question about who should be held accountable or compensate those negatively affected by the current U.S. government when they leave. And And the way things are going, is there hope for the U.S. as a first world country? He was wondering as well.
So I guess if I could have a clarification, compensate for what specifically? Are you talking about tariffs? Are you talking about airstrikes? I mean, what are we talking about?
And I am not sure. I don't know. Dan, would you like to explain that, or like, well,
I mean, I
maybe
don't.
but
I mean, I just sort of in a general sense, I don't think. Um, well, yeah, like the airstrikes. Okay. Um, well, I don't think that there's going to be compensation. I mean, I think that if Trump's in control, it would all be basically a transactional thing, and Trump very notoriously doesn't pay his contractors or different things like that. So I really don't see that happening. I don't really. I mean, if you're talking, I mean, I guess it depends on how much further we go with bombing. But I mean, who's gonna, even if you have regime change, if you get it through blowing up all the power plants and all this other stuff, who's going to rebuild those? I mean, we blew up a lot of the infrastructure in Iraq when we invaded Iraq. We ended up having to rebuild that because you can't, how could we have a stable government in Baghdad, even if we put it in power, if you've destroyed the infrastructure? So it's one would hope that cooler heads would prevail. And I know the Pentagon has pushed back on some of, Trump's wanting to, obliterate Iran or just attack some of these, power plants and things. I mean, aside from the fact that that is basically what Putin's doing in Ukraine. I mean, it's a war crime. So I don't think we really want to ape Russia. That's really, since we're not in the post World War II order anymore, I guess we can ape Russia. But I don't think that's what we should be doing. Uh, but you know, I don't see. I mean, think of all the people we would have to compensate. How are we going to compensate for all the tariff wars and all the, you know, at what? I don't see it happening. Um, I mean, we did a lot of damage in Iraq and other places with airstrikes and stuff. Did we ever compensate people then? No. How about Vietnam? How about, so I don't see that happening here. Um, it'd be, the longer this goes on, the more expensive it would be to do that. So it would not be a small amount of money. And we're not even willing to provide some military aid to Ukraine. I can't imagine us compensating Iran or others for some of this. Would we compensate the Saudis or UAE or some of these other Gulf states who are getting their infrastructure blown up by the Iranians? I mean, on one level, we're kind of culpable because we started the war, but I can't imagine that happening. I can't imagine Congress would go along with that either.
it's, well, so here's another question that um, draws on your political psychology skills. It says, with Trump's decline in popularity and support, do you see an increase in risk of irrational behavior on his part?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, when leaders like this get under high stress, and if he starts getting stress and feeling that pressure, Trump has a tendency to lash out at opponents, and he already is distrustful. He's always looking for enemies. He's always wanting to punish his enemies. I mean, they just re-indicted Comey again today. Uh, and just, there's this, always kind of looking for the threat. And I think you're seeing, the aging issue. I mean, you don't even have to be a psychologist to, if you look at a video of Trump talking 4 or 5 years ago, and now there's clear cognitive changes, just in the structure of the language, the way in which he frames things. And I think you're going to see increasing. I mean, he's going to be 80 years old this year. So I mean, it's kind of ironic. Everybody was focusing so much on Biden's slippage, and you could see Biden's cognitive decline. You could see the problems. Well, we're seeing the same thing with Trump, but nobody's really making an issue of it for some reason. It's just kind of odd. Um, but I think you're going to see more erratic behavior um, because, there's going to be a decline. I think the thing you'll probably notice with Trump with the age aspect is that I think you're going to see the filters falling away. I think there's going to be less self-regulation.
Mhm.
So and you already see a little bit of it, but where he says something that maybe a year or two ago he wouldn't have said. He goes just a little too far, or he and I think probably all of you who have elderly relatives or aging parents, at a certain point as they get older, you start seeing some of those filters dropping, right?
Mhm.
Well, you're going to see that. I mean, Trump's human. I mean, he's going to have the effects of age, and he's not a healthy person, despite what his doctor says he's the healthiest specimen ever. But, some people are saying he's the healthiest ever, the best. But it's a sort of I think, you can see the problems already a year or two from now. I think it'll be more pronounced. Um, and if you couple that with, like maybe the Democrats taking Congress back and holding hearings and putting pressure on him, who knows from some of the stuff that's happened, or is there going to be a third impeachment hearing? Who knows? Imagine how those profile characteristics that I described will get exacerbated under stress and then couple in the aging. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think you would see potentially more erratic behavior, maybe some more behavior that's detached from reality a little bit, just because Trump's not monitoring reality anyway. So, if he's living in his own bubble and then it gets more stressed, I think you might even have it closing in and becoming even more of a seal bubble. Uh, and that's a good way to just have policy disasters. So yeah.
So here's a question about foreign policy and domestic politics. So Trump's actions against Iran were exactly what Project 2025 had insisted that he should not do, and also sort of the gist of his campaign, right? What he campaigned on. So why then have we not seen more serious opposition from his MAGA allies or Republican lawmakers?
Yeah. Well, I think there's different combinations. I mean, I think there's a lot of lack of spine because I think a lot of uh, Republicans in Congress don't want to get primaried from the right.
Mhm.
Um, I think one of the consequences of all the gerrymandering, and I'm not a fan of the gerrymandering, uh, is that they've created such safe conservative districts that they, on one level, have immunized themselves from public pressure because they only have to worry what the true believers think. Well, the problem is you create that environment, now you got to live in it.
Mhm.
And that's why, if they're going to get pressured, it's usually that they're going to get primaried even from farther from the right, from more of the MAGA faithful. And it's the grassroots in the GOP that are the heaviest MAGA. Even though it's a small percentage of the public,
Mhm.
that doesn't matter because the politics is, if you have to go through the primary process in order to get to the general elections. So I think a lot of these, and Trump has shown he'll target anybody who goes against him, even if they're fellow Republicans. He'll campaign against them. He'll try to, he'll encourage people to primary them. We've seen that with Tillis. We've seen that with a number of other Republican Congress people. Yeah, I think that is something that makes it hard for the Republicans to stand up. And then I think there are some that actually believe in this. And I mean, I think cult is an overused term, but there is an aspect that's sort of like cult of personality, I think is more what it is. It's more like how Kim Jong-un has a cult of personality, or how in some regimes where the dear leader or the leader is seen as that authority figure. And then people that are really into that kind of just accept that. as the reality. I think there is a portion of the MAGA crowd that are like that. And literally Trump could tell them tomorrow the earth is flat and up is down, and they would go, okay. However, what you're seeing is that there are MAGA people who cared about some particular issues, like the Tucker Carlsons and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and people like that, who are calling, they're blowing the whistle on, yay, hey, you promised not to get into these wars. You promised not to do all this. And what are you doing? They wanted him to be attacking the federal government, right? Um, they didn't really want him doing all this other stuff. So I think you are seeing a fracturing of the MAGA base a bit. Um, but I don't know how much. I mean, he still ends up with 60, 70, 80% popularity approval rating among Republicans. I think what's killing them is essentially you look at the public opinion of independent voters. It's down in the mid to low 20s at this point. You can't win a general election if you're polling in the 20s with independents and even young people. I mean, I saw somebody pop up on the chat with mentioning younger people. Yeah, a lot of the younger people, they totally bought all this. I guess, I think about my kids. It's like I kind of forget that they're so young that they don't even remember what happened 4 or 5 years ago because they weren't really paying attention back then. I think, how can you guys not know that this is what we were going to have? But we lived through the first term. They didn't, so they kind of bought the propaganda, and then, I mean, they've been disillusioned. They're like, well, no. And my job, I'm not getting easy jobs, and the price of gas is $4 or $5 or whatever. I mean, all these things that Trump's, oh, I'm gonna on day one make the price of bread and gas and everything else go away. I'll solve the war in Ukraine in a day, and all this stuff he promised. Well, the people who were really listening and thinking the promises meant something, I think he lost them. And I think that's the younger people that you're kind of referencing. So.
All right. Well, again, so if we just keep you for one last question, and then we can wrap up here. And so Dan has a question, but it relates to a question I was going to ask. So Dan, I'm going to he had a question about repairing the diplomatic damage. Let me just make it broader for our last question. Earlier on, you gave this really nice rundown of the key features of the post-World War II system with sort of, open trade and alliances. And so after this particular administration, as you mentioned, it's a consequential presidency. So it's a lot of stuff is going to be different. So if you were trying to just kind of in your best estimation, what would be the key features of that system that we're going to be living in post-Trump? What do you think are going to be the key features of that world?
Are you talking about the world that we're going to have as a result of this, or
Yes.
how we would try to repair it?
Well, I mean, I guess the world that we have, and then maybe as part of that is the things, because
if we continue down the current path trajectories
for like the next 3 years, and then the next president, what sort of world are they facing?
Well, I mean, they'll end up in a world. Well, I mean, I think very much an economically depressed world. Whether we have a depression, if we continue to, damage the oil. I mean, it depends on how far this goes south on Iran, actually, with some of this stuff. But I think, a new president's going to face a world that doesn't trust America anymore. We've lost our leadership, our global leadership role. We will, even if we're still in NATO, it will be a much weakened alliance. I think, and on one level, I mean, I think it's good that the Europeans are going to be kind of following their own star and not necessarily relying on us. But by the same token, I think that China is going to far exceed us. They're replacing us as the superpower. They're certainly going to pass us economically. We're probably going to end up with a military disadvantage in the long run because, you can't destroy all the scientific research, cause a brain drain like we're having our researchers fleeing to Europe and in China and other places, and then just reconstitute it overnight. I mean, that's not going to happen. We're going to we're going to be so far behind and at a competitive disadvantage on green technology by the time this is all said and done, that really we've ceded the future technologies to China. Um, I think that um, our reputational damage all around the world is going to be very difficult. I think a future president coming in would want to be able to make use of the intelligence community, would want to have a really good State Department to make use of diplomacy and stuff, which they're not going to have that option. I think the expertise that's being hemorrhaged now, um, once you lose that, it takes generations to rebuild it. So you might want good intelligence, but you will have done so much damage to the actor that would provide that that they can no longer provide you with that quality product. I would argue the same thing for the State Department. I would argue the same thing for some of the staff at Pentagon. I think that, and they've been firing all these senior generals, all these people with all this expertise. We're losing a lot of military competence and expertise. And, yeah, okay, you just keep promoting the sergeant up to captain, up to colonel, but you're not necessarily replacing the expertise. It's like, I can train a new analyst to go into the intelligence community and, okay, you work Russia issue, but that's not going to replace the guy who had been there 25 years and knew it like the back of their hand. So I might have technically an analyst doing Russia or be focusing on it, but do I actually provide you with that expertise? So on a whole bunch of different levels, I think economically we're going to be at a disadvantage to China. I think our economy is going to take a hit. I mean, already China spends more on education than the US and the European Union combined. Uh, they spend far more. I mean, China's investing $600 billion in basic science and research as we're cutting hundreds of billions of dollars from our research. I mean, that's not a recipe for future success. And when you add that to the military competition where, all those technical advancements, a lot of that research, there's a lot of research at the universities that's been cut was actually research that actually went in to help the Pentagon. Well, you're
Mhm.
losing that. China's gaining that advantage. Uh, we've alienated your allies. I mean, that's what I was kind of talking about with
Mhm.
once you do these sorts of damages, you've ruptured trust. And even if you have a good administration come in that tries to reinstitute the post-World War II order, I think a lot of allies and a lot of countries are going to be reluctant to give us the role of leader of the free world again because, well, okay, you guys crashed the car last time. Are we going to give you the keys again?
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not so sure that they would. And also, I think one key aspect is that you can't have the yo-yo effect like we had. Like Trump came in and did a bunch of damage, and then Biden came in and did a lot of repair. And I
Mhm.
remember going to NATO conferences in Europe, during Trump and then after when Biden was in, and you could see that there was particularly our Eastern European NATO allies were very unsure. And then Trump comes back in and just again, well, okay, you get another president come in that tries to reinstate. I think you would need to have a series, like like a long series of presidents that didn't repeat sort of the Trump experience that did value the post-World War II order. And I think only over a longer period of time would you actually rebuild some of the trust and reinvigorate some of those alliances.
Mhm.
Again, the longer this goes and the more damage that's done. I mean, what if we do occupy Greenland? I mean, there are things that could be done that would make it very difficult. I mean, I think somebody asked a question about if we actually did finally leave NATO. I'm not sure. I think NATO would continue in the form of the Europeans and Canada,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't be the valuable asset that we've enjoyed for 75 years. So
Well, well, thank you very much. On behalf of the World Affairs Council and everyone here, thank you. It was a great talk. It's I mean, it was a sobering talk, but I mean, I don't think we have any speaker who can speak to so many different areas so knowledgeably just based on your research and your personal work. So thank you very much. And to all our audience members, thank you for coming to our event. Hopefully we'll see you at our next talk on May 27th on Iran at Bellarmine University. And so good evening, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, John, and nice to see you again, Marcia.
Mhm.